the compiler, the recorder here maybe would be the best thing, is demonstrating something for us, and that is that the severity of the situation in the divided kingdom of Israel. Remember that the 10 tribes were taken from the house of David. One tribe was given to the Davidic king, Rehoboam, and one tribe kind of hung out with them, Benjamin. Benjamin, you think, oh, well, they're so loyal to Judah, but you have to kind of question Benjamin's motivations all the way through. I mean, to be quite frank, it doesn't say why they chose to stick with Judah, but just that they did. Don't know if they thought that they would then have undue influence over a formerly powerful monarch and tribe if they remained with Judah. You know, there are political reasons for that. You hear that suggestion, right? Every once in a while you hear, and I'm not sure that it's correct, but I think it is correct, that when Texas joined the Union, we had the right to divide ourselves up into 5 congressional districts, which would really mess with your tortilla chip game, right? Like if you divided it up, but you know, people who argue against doing something like that, of course, mean that we would no longer be a unified state, but that we would gain political influence by that. We would gain congressional presence. I think Benjamin is kind of doing that. I think Benjamin is tired of being the odd man out and not having as much influence, being a smaller, weaker tribe. We covered that, right? If you're the smaller, weaker tribe in Israel, there's one reason for that. What is the reason for being a smaller, weaker tribe in Israel? You done screwed up, son, right? Like you get whacked, you get disciplined. You know, the tribes experience massive population reductions when they do things like the Korah rebellion, right? The earth opens up and swallows up everybody. All of a sudden, generations of your people are missing, and you have to start back from scratch, building up your tribe. So it's Benjamin's fault that Benjamin is what Benjamin is at this point in the narrative, but I think that's what they did. Regardless, we're at the divided kingdom. And so we're in the reign in this section of First Kings. The writer, the recorder of the record here, is going to use Asa kind of as the chronology determiner here, the chronological marker, because he's the one that has the long reign, and his descendants. So that's what it is. Sometimes it switches back and forth how they calculate things. So Asa is a good king, right? Asa is a good king. He slept with his fathers. Don't you wish you had this, the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? We've been over that a couple of times. We don't have that. It's not your Chronicles. I think it would be like binge watching old Jerry Springer episodes, to be quite frank. Right? I never watched that show, but in my undergrad, my suite mates were addicted to the thing, and so it was a constant presence in the general arena. And that's kind of how I think, if you read deeply into all the actions, isn't it horrible? They did greater evil in the sight of the Lord than anybody that went before him. And we made sure to write that down. We wrote that down. That's going on our social media, you know, but we don't have it. It's not probably very productive. So that's there. But Asa slept with his fathers, buried with his fathers in the city of David, and Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in his place. So Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, became king over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. So again, flashback, right? Because Asa just died, and he reigned over Israel 2 whole years. 2 whole years. If only we had Congress people that only served 2 years, right? But we have reigned over Israel for 2 years here because he did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and he walked in the way of his father and in his sin. This is key, in which he made Israel sin, right? So Baasha, the son of Ahijah, the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha struck him down at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines, while Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibbethon. So Baasha killed him in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his place. This is going to become a common refrain, right? This is what happens when somebody like Jeroboam takes the good promise of God and does foolish things with it, wicked things, which is foolish, biblically speaking, right? We have a much more expansive view of what foolish means in our common usage, but foolish in the Bible is rebellious and wicked. Because it sounds terrible, right? You're supposed to take out your foolish son and stone him. Because who doesn't have anybody? If you have a few teenage sons around, right, you probably think that you're around a lot of foolishness in our colloquial use of the term, right? But they don't deserve stoning because they're dummies. Amen. All right, they do dumb things, and some of us don't grow out of it. But we don't do that. But foolishness is wickedness and rebellion. It's a sad story. So Baasha, who's not a righteous man, he's just a political maneuverer, comes in and strikes down Nadab in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah. Came about as soon as he was king, he struck down all the household of Jeroboam, which you'll remember as a matter of prophecy. He did not leave to Jeroboam any persons alive until he had destroyed them, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite, and because of the sins which he sinned, and which he made Israel sin, because of his provocation with which he provoked Yahweh, God of Israel, to anger. So as Baasha, you kind of get when you see that double vowel sound a lot of times like that. Ma'aka is another one. You kind of have the sound, and it's sometimes hard to do. That's the sound. So sometimes we'll just shorten it to Texan, right? Like we do with Green, Bernie, Burr. It's just Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar. So he's not a righteous person, right? He's simply another instance of God using a wicked person as an instrument to bring about his disciplinary prophecy, right? So Jeroboam's family is wiped off the face of the map. This was common, right, in the ancient world. You had to, because in the ancient world, blood guilt was a thing. Like they avenged each other, right? That's and I don't think unrighteously, right? Israel had set up. You remember when we talked about as they entered the land, that there were the cities of refuge, where there's 6 of them. There's 3 in the north and 3 in the south. Those were codified because it was a righteous vengeance. It's cool. I thought she was checking me up here, asking Alexa if I was right on this. That's okay. It's cool. You ought to check me, but check me with the Bible, not Alexa, because who knows what that's going to do. That's all right. Or Google or whatever. So the cities of refuge, vengeance was codified. It was expected. Actually, it was righteous, especially in the cases of murder. There was not a system. We didn't have capital punishment. You didn't get free lunch for 30 years before you got executed in the ancient Near East, right? But for manslaughter, where it was accidental, right? Where it was not aggravated, it wasn't murder. If you accidentally killed somebody, there's no judgment on the avenger, right? The avenger could chase them right to the walls of the city. 1 foot into the walls of the city, the avenger was not allowed to touch them as long as they stayed in that city. But there's no consequence. The avenger was not seen to be doing anything unrighteous, right? So that is not the case there. That was codified. And so they decided, since vengeance was not considered unrighteous, right, they did this. This was the way to make sure that vengeance didn't take place. See what people did? That we're going to wipe out all of your family. Anybody who could claim blood guilt against you, anybody who could say, because you're my 3rd cousin 3 times removed of this person that was killed unrighteously, I can wipe out your whole family. Well, I'll do it first. That's what they did. We're going to wipe you out. This was a matter of prophecy on God's part, in this case, additionally, so that there was no heritage left to Jeroboam. I mean, that's the extreme consequence of misapplying or failing to embrace really God's good promise to him. That happens over and over throughout history. But Jeroboam, is fairly early in the history of the divided kingdom. It demonstrates how far south they were already. They did this because of which he made, of the sins which he made Israel sin, and the sins which Jeroboam sinned, which he made Israel sin. And Nadab suffered the consequences of that. Nadab was evil in his own right. But all of this came upon him simply because he was Jeroboam's son. And again, and they're all written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. I'm kind of surprised that the name Nadab persisted in Israel at all, except for maybe literarily. Has anyone ever come across an Ahab, like in real life? Ever come across an Ahab? I have. I have come across a Jezebel. Yeah, right. But I mean, literary. So there's Ahab, right? Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. That's literary. That's a metaphor, right. So, never run across one. I have run across a Jezebel. Yeah, in real life, you can tell somebody's not real well educated if they name their kid Jezebel. And who was Samson's? Those three. Delilah. Delilah is far more common than that. Those are things that I get surprised by when I'm like, okay, that's not what I would do. I would change my name as an adult if I was named that. Nadab is another one. Nadab gets smoked. Why? Because he burned strange fire before the Lord. Nadab and Abihu. Yeah, Bill.
And names come up on the list of names in the Bible.
Right. Well, yeah. And I have friends who do. I mean, like some missionary friends of ours to Mozambique years ago had a kid, and they named him Benaiah. And literally, that's what they did. They went to a list of mighty valiant men, and if they had this many more sons, they were going to go down the list, I guess. Never heard. They call him Ben, I think, but Benaiah is one of the mighty men under Joab, right? So you find him in the list. Not real common, but also not offensive and horrible, right? which is some of these names. Why would you name anybody that? So there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. In the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, became king over all Israel at Tirzah and reigned 24 years. It's a long tenure for a king in the northern kingdom. He did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and he walked in the way of Jeroboam and in his sin, which he made Israel sin. So you want to compare, though, and contrast this, because there are more severe statements. What did he do here? Well, he did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and he imitated Jeroboam. But most of these guys end up escalating the evil, right? They end up getting worse. And you're thankful, again, that you don't have to read it. You know how hard it is, like, sometimes to read the Bible in mixed company? Yeah, right? It is sometimes. There's some stuff in there that feels, at least from my background, feels inappropriate to talk about in mixed company. I feel like that whole book of the Chronicles of the Kings or whatever, I'm glad that we don't have all of the records, especially when it says they escalated beyond this. But you may ask yourself, why did God do it this way? Why did God swap Baasha, why? If he wasn't going to be better than Jeroboam, why would he do that? And why would he wipes people off the map out of the northern kingdom over and over and over, as we'll see. It becomes very tight refrain here. So why does God do that? It's a complex question. I mean, why is a question? Because God wants to, right? We can give the Sunday school answer. This is Sunday school. Because God is sovereign. He does what he wants. We cover that. So let's start with, why is the kingdom divided? Oh, okay. So very specifically, Solomon violated the principle that the king's obedience is central to the blessing of the nation. But the northern kingdom is divided because they're under discipline. The nation is under discipline. It is an act of mercy that any of the tribes at all are still under the Davidic king, even though the Davidic lineage is sometimes good and sometimes bad. It's not a guarantee, but it's a matter of discipline. But discipline, who does God discipline? Those who loves, those are his children, those who he has a familial relationship with by his own declaration, certainly not. So we need to understand that, right? The 10 tribes of Israel are still Jews. They still have an enduring, unconditional covenant that subjects them to the discipline, but also guarantees them the fulfillment of the unconditional covenants, right? So you don't get all of the fanciful 10 lost tribes, right? They don't disappear, they don't get subsumed, they don't go away. They still have a heritage in the kingdom and in eternity, because the discipline that we're reading about is the evidence at this time in history that they possess and maintain the status as the recipients of an unconditional covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's why God is repetitively disciplining them. Why is it that these kings have such short tenures and God seems to allow them to be replaced with terrible people?
Lesser of two evils?
Well, that's how God disciplines nations, actually. Yeah, the lesser of two evils. There's also an interplay in that people are responsible for their own behavior, right? And they're held to a high standard. And so God is going to secure the heritage of the nation of Israel, which requires preserving the heritage of the 10 tribes that are part of the northern kingdom, even in discipline. And each king is worthy of discipline for his own actions and or destruction. And so that complexity determines how long they're going to reign. Oddly enough, I don't read that this guy, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, does not have a good promise from God. Jeroboam specifically got a promise that was conditional, but emulated the Davidic monarchy to a degree, not entirely, but you'll have an enduring house, you'll have a dynasty, your sons and your grandsons and your great-grandsons will rule as long as they walk by my commandments and statutes. Baasha doesn't have that, right? And yet he reigns 24 years, but did evil still and walked in the way of Jeroboam. So there's something there also that he did not, even though he was evil, he did not disregard and discount the promise of God in the way that Jeroboam did, right? He didn't possess that. So he wasn't given that information. And I think that the accountability is different when he's not given that direct promise like that. Make sense? That you're accountable for the revelation that you receive, and the people who have received more revelation are more immediately accountable much of the time for adhering to it. All right. So, but he doesn't get off scot-free, right? A word of Yahweh came to Jehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying, inasmuch as I exalted you from the dust, made you leader over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam, and have made my people Israel sin, provoking me to anger with their sins, behold, I will consume Baasha and his house, and I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Literally, he uses the same words. Anyone of Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs will eat, and any one of his who dies in the field, the birds of the heaven will eat. Now the rest of the acts of Baasha and what he did and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? There it is again. Notice he says, it wasn't that it was a matter of prophecy. He said, but this is what I did for you. I exalted you from the dust, and I made you leader over my people Israel. He does not say that you'll have an enduring house. He doesn't say that you'll have a dynasty. It was not guaranteed to you, but you're still accountable for knowing what happened to Jeroboam. For knowing what happened to Jeroboam and doing the same things that he did in that same exact position. And this emulates what God had promised to the nation as a whole. Right? The nation as a whole was that if you walk in the ways of the people that I drove out before you, I'm going to drive you out, at least for a time, into exile. As one of you put 1,000 of them to flight, 1,000, or one of them will put 1,000 of you to flight. It's just going to turn the tables entirely. Terrible curse, though. I mean, even today, right? And we don't have, who has a doggy? You all love your doggy. Your doggy is sweet. Your doggy loves you. You can't imagine the doggy not in your house. We even have somebody, you play with dogs for fun, for work even. Yeah, she's works at what facility is it? A training facility or just a boarding facility? Boarding facility. Yeah. I'm not a super dog person, right? I like my dogs. My dogs suit me well. They do a job. I appreciate them. That's not the way most of the world, for most of history, has looked at a dog, right? Why would a dog eat a corpse in the middle of a city? Well, because that's what dogs were allowed to do. A dog wouldn't do it if they weren't hungry. A dog wouldn't do it if they weren't starving. It wouldn't do it if you weren't a cursed person. Imagine, you know, um, an environment and what that says about a city, that's something that happens within its walls, right? What do we do? You know, well, of course, it's calmed down a lot because border crossings have calmed down a whole lot, but people were jumping off the wall 3-4 times a day and breaking a leg and dying in the canals, right? So you would be horrified. But the last thing that anybody that is a living, breathing human being would say is, leave the body on the canal for the dogs. You wouldn't say that. That's horrible. That is a tremendously terrible curse to pronounce on somebody, especially in the ancient world where doggies weren't the sweet little puppies that everybody loved for life, right? It was a curse on them. And the birds of heaven will eat them, right? The carrion, when I was a kid, we used to hang around because it's about 200 feet wide electrical easement, the big towers going through. And if you got up real early on a misty morning, you could walk about half a mile, and I kid you not, there were 5,000 buzzards sitting on those electrical towers, those big frame ones. And we would pretend that we were sitting out there waiting for them to take off and show us where the bodies were. You know, that's the kind of thing, you know, because it felt like the country, you know, when we were out there, not the electrical easement. Anyway, but, you know, that's the idea. It's a barren and terrible place, cursed place, where things like that happen. So it's a judgment on the nation as well, that's going to happen to the former king's family. So Baasha slept with his fathers and was buried in Tirzah, and Elah his son became king in his place. Moreover, the word of Yahweh through the prophet of Jehu, the son of Hanani, also came against Baasha and his household, both because of all the evil which he did in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger with the work of his hands, and being like the house of Jeroboam, and because he struck it. And in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, Elah the son of Baasha became king over Israel at Tirzah, and reigned 2 years. The servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him. Now he was at Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza. It was over the household at Tirzah. And Zimri went in and struck him and put him to death in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and became king in his place. And it came about when he became king, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he killed all the household of Baasha. He did not leave a single male, neither of his relatives nor of his friends. Thus Zimri destroyed all the household of Baasha, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke against Baasha through Jehu the prophet. For all the sins of Baasha and the sins of Elah his son, which they sinned, and which they made Israel sin, provoking Yahweh, God of Israel, to anger with their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Elah and all that he did, are they not written in the chronicles of the kings of Israel? So, again, this guy, Zimri, is actually the winner, I think, of the shortest tenure for king over Israel. We'll get there in a second. But I wanted you to note, right, when we talk about the personal accountability of these guys who are ruling, that Baasha was judged here very specifically because he emulated Jeroboam. He was like the house of Jeroboam, and because he struck the house of Jeroboam. In other words, he was supposed to take that as an indication that he should do better. He should have a better performance record than his predecessor, and he should have known that, and he was held accountable for it. As well as just continuing on in the evil. He was judged for that. So you do have that. It's important to realize that we may grant political leaders immunity for immoral, unethical, and criminal acts, but God does not. Amen. Thankfully, right? I'm sure that there is a book of the Chronicles of the Presidents of the United States, and I'm sure I equally do not want to read as much as I don't want to read this one, to be quite frank. But God is just and righteous, and he does not grant immunity for the things that he sees and no one else sees, right? So, anyway, any other questions about that section? I'm telling you, this is going to get repetitive. Every once in a while it does that. Yeah, Becky?
It just seems amazing that God was able to preserve the line of Judah all the way to Christ.
Mhm.
We see that.
Yes. Well, and this isn't even Judah. This is all during Asa's reign. He was a pretty good guy. Yeah, he's a pretty good guy in the middle of some pretty bad guys. This is just basically one generation. I mean, functionally, we're at 27 years of Asa here, and all of this drama has taken place during his one reign. But it was a matter of prophecy that Zimri was going to do this. But it's a very immediate thing, right? Verse 15, in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, Zimri reigned 7 whole days. That sounds like a Hollywood marriage, man. Back in the day, was that Elizabeth Taylor's marriage, or is that the king of Israel? You know, y'all don't even know who Elizabeth Taylor is anymore, and shame on you if you don't. If you don't know who Elizabeth Taylor and Sophia Loren are, you're missing out entirely on substantial amounts of American history. Just watching Legends of the Lost the other day. It's the one movie with John Wayne and Sophia Loren, by the way. That's why it's significant. All right. And it's not even a Western. Can y'all believe? Gabriel doesn't even believe that I watch anything that's not a Western. Yeah, he doesn't believe that. Anyway, so 7 days at Tirzah. The people were camped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines, and the people who were camped heard it and said, Zimri has conspired and has also struck down the king. Therefore, all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. Now, there may be some pragmatic lessons you ought to listen there. You may do righteous things, but you also ought to do them wisely, right? Because Zimri goes out. He's only ruling for 7 days. He's already whacked everybody in the whole previous king's family. He might have waited a week or 3, you know? Get your feet under you, get warmed up, figure out who's your friend. Because otherwise, this is just a shock to the system. You know what I mean? The whole king, like that was our lawful king, you know, and you struck him and his whole family dead. So they appoint another guy. Omri and all Israel went with him up from Gibbethon and besieged Tirzah. And when Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house and burned the king's house over him with fire and died. He did it to himself. How about a drama queen, man? He lit the king's house on fire and died because of his sins which he sinned, doing evil in the sight of Yahweh, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin which he did, making Israel sin. All the levels of accountability, right? He did evil before the Lord. He did evil against the nation, walking in the ways of Jeroboam. And he was guilty of his personal sin, all of which also full circle made Israel sin further than what they're supposed to do. It's hard to drag people out of sin in a country that was founded on idolatry. You know what I mean? Like the country was essentially functionally created as a Baal worshiping, calf worshiping entity. But they were not without revelation, right? The leftovers of the exile, which of course we haven't gotten to yet, they're still in the land, right? But ultimately we know that the key to them staying out of exile is that the kings are obeying. As long as the kings are walking with the Lord and obeying his statutes and commands, as wicked as the people get, they get to stay in the land. That was the rule, and they've been violating it, right? Ultimately, because of that, they're taken into exile, the northern kingdom first and the southern kingdom. But never entirely, right? Randy Price kind of covers this, that there's always Jewish people living in the land. And if you talk to people today, they're like, well, even the Bible teaches that they were taken out of the land and that's a judgment on them, and that's not accurate. There's always been Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob descendants living in the land. And we know that they had revelation. We know that they had it because that's how the Samaritans arose, right? Was that's where the half-breed kind of situation is, where they were sort of Jewish and sort of not Jewish. They worshiped the one true God on the wrong mountain, but they did do it, and it was Jewish enough that a key component of Jesus' ministry is to approach the Samaritan woman at the well and offer her the gospel, right? Offer her the message that is a Jewish message. When Jesus says, I'm going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, that circle includes Samaritans for him. That's how I see that, right? So that's how that takes place, right? So they had revelation, and my point in saying all that is, going back, that revelation was enough to hold them accountable to. It was not simply enough. The kings knew, the tribes knew, they knew what they were doing was wrong. And they knew that it was idolatry, and they knew if they read, they had available to them what was going to happen explicitly, what was going to happen if they continued to do this. So, the rest of the acts of Zimri and his conspiracy which he carried out, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So then the people of Israel were divided into two parts. Half the people followed Tibni, the son of Ginath, to make him king, and the other half followed Omri. But the people who followed Omri prevailed over the people who followed Tibni, the son of Ginath. And Tibni died, and Omri became king. It doesn't say how he died. I imagine he was probably executed. But, he didn't, no drama, right? He didn't burn the house down on top of himself. He died like a man, sounds like to me, knowing that that's what happens to traitors, and that's what you become when the winners write history, right? Right, because they're all traitors, right? We're talking about the northern kingdom of Israel. There's this honor among thieves or whatever. Well, you killed my favorite thief. Well, I'm going to kill you first, and all this. So that was the nature of the thing, right? Nobody was upset when I moved here to El Paso and violence was high in Juarez, right? This is what you would hear from people who lived in El Paso. The drug dealers used to just kill each other, and now they're killing all the other people, right? Nobody cared if they killed each other. They cared, right? But as long as it was internecine, it wasn't nearly as big of a deal. As long as it was just the cartels fighting each other, it was okay, right? This is what's happening here, right? They're getting in each other's business internally here. So, in 31st year, I told you, of the king of Asa of Judah, long-running king, Omri became king over Israel and reigned 12 years. Pretty long. He reigned 6 years at Tirzah. He bought the hill Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. A lot of money. A lot of money. He built on the hill and named the city which he built Samaria after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. And Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, or Yahweh, I prefer to read it that way, and acted more wickedly than all who were before him. Now, you could take that cumulatively, or you could take it individually, that he was the worst one of a long line of bad guys, either way. But it's the first time that that's the case. And he was the one who prevailed. And Tibni died, so we don't know what Tibni would have done. But the Lord allows this nation under discipline to have a fairly long reign under this guy who acted more wickedly than all who were before him, simply because it's designed to culminate in the fulfillment of those prophecies, right? That they ultimately will be taken out of the land in order to be restored to it, so that they understand the fullness of the fulfillment of God's word and promise given to them. And so this is within the plan and purpose for God in history, right? And for Israel in history. So he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in his sins which he made Israel sin, provoking Yahweh, God of Israel, with their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Omri which he did and his might which he showed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab his son became king in his place. This is the first Ahab, we're sure, right? Because nobody would name anyone Ahab after that. But you almost hear the drums beating in the distance, right? It's terror. It's, oh yeah, the music just got dark. Ahab is on the scene. And he became king in his place. Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all who were before him. Again, could be cumulative. It could be that he's simply the apex sinner, the apex idolater. It could be indicated really that he is the sum total of his sin is greater than the entire sum total of his lineage. I don't know that it matters. He's still the worst one. And it came about as though it had been a trivial thing. He's flippant about it. Flippant people make me angrier than morons, by the way. Right? It was a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshipped him. And so he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. So Samaria is not that old of a city when it starts this syncretism, right? The foundation of syncretism they knew. So this was what Jeroboam had done, right, was actually to create something, I would say, new. He created the calf was a cultic image that was worshipped, right? But it was not specifically, completely, entirely emulating the religions of the nation or around them specifically. What Ahab did immediately, he did all of the other crap that Jeroboam did, and then also brought in the Baal worship and built a residence for Baal and worshipped him there. A friend of mine recently mentioned that there was, it was Andy Woods. Yeah, some of y'all know him personally. Some of y'all listen to him on the radio, and he had a program here recently. He said that in Sugar Land, Texas, recently they had a Muslim call to worship in the town square, right in the middle of Sugar Land, Texas. And the proclamation was that now we are joined with, whatever was it, Mecca or something, that the city of Sugar Land is now joined spiritually, essentially, with that. And I'm like, of all the things we're worried about in the world, the Islamicization of Sugar Land, Texas was not on my bingo card. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't worried about that, right? But it is a tremendous shift, right, in the culture of the town that permits that. That there is objectively now a new form of worship taking place right in the city square. Now, objectively, legally, I don't know that they can be prohibited from doing that, actually, because that's how our system works, right? One of the things that we do need to remember, and this is off topic, and we only got a couple minutes, right, is that there's no such thing as an apolitical Islam. So while you do have to, in our country, we respect freedom of religion, we allow people to worship, I mean, that's the foundation of our country. Islam is seditious, and there are laws against sedition. Those of us who grew up in the South are well aware of those, right? And so all Islam is seditious. There's either honest Islam or deceptive Islam. Honest is what my buddy Sharam Hadian calls the lower house and the upper house. When they're not in control, it's the lower house. That's when the Muslims are smiley. That's when Islam is smiley. That's when they just want to have interfaith dialogue, when they think they don't have the upper hand. And that sort of thing is right on the line, right? But that's a danger to a country specifically, right? Because we've talked about that in the United States. One of the reasons that I think the key reason that we still exist politically is because we support Israel, right? So what happens when you Islamicize an ally of Israel, right? You get wiped off the face of the planet, at least as you were. It's the end of the world as we know it for the United States, and I don't think that's an overstatement. So that's something to be combated, because it brings tremendous discipline to a country allowing that to take place. Parallel, right? We're not Israel. But we have standards that apply, here are principles that apply. Building a house for Baal, no matter if you built the city purposely for it, that's worse, right? If you built the house there, he didn't build the city, but I mean, at least he didn't try to do it in Jerusalem or something and take over. But it's terrible. It's a horrible thing to set up that idolatry specifically, right? Rather than emulating the sin of Aaron in the Exodus, which is what Jeroboam, I think, was doing. Jeroboam was and Aaron were conflating and commingling, right? When he actually named the calf. He said, "Behold, the God who brought you out of Egypt," when he was looking at the calf, right? Syncretism, but it wasn't this. It wasn't allowing an encroachment of Baal worship as the king. So he treated it flippantly. You know what I mean? Trivially. I once, that particular character trait makes me the most angry of anything. Being flippant about serious matters. I spoke with online, I don't personally call these people all the time, with a fairly well-known hyper grace guy. And I don't use that term. They would consider it pejorative, but that's the common term for it. And I asked him a question about his theology, because he doesn't have a rewards theology. He believes that the Bema seat and the great white throne judgment are the same thing. Terrible thought when you actually get into the details of what it means. We understand there's a distinction, there's a chronological chasm between the two of at least 1,000 years. Believers show up at the Bema, they're alive when they get there in the Lord, and they're alive in the Lord when they leave. The great white throne, everyone's dead when they get there, and everyone's dead when they leave. That's big distinctions there. And I said, so if you believe that, what do you believe about rewards? And I asked them specifically about 5 rewards, because there are 5 crowns in Scripture that are kind of important to pastors, right? There's an elder one, the crown of life, for those who rule well. Oh, that's just Jesus. That's all just Jesus. That's just basically all of those are metaphors for getting Jesus. I'm like, well, how much of Jesus do you think you don't have right now? It was just an extremely flippant answer from him. And I tell you what, my soul raged for a long time at that, right? He has a PhD, but it's not in the field. Can I just say that? Makes people somewhat arrogant in linguistics or something, applied linguistics. Probably not totally unhelpful. Anyway, you shouldn't be flippant, certainly shouldn't be flippant about being in this position over a nation, even under discipline, that has a permanent, unconditional, perpetual covenant with Yahweh, God of all creation, right? That's not a position that should be characterized by flippancy. All right. Any questions? We got about a minute or two. Questions, comments, observations?
Just had a comment about going back to Sugar Land.
Oh, yeah.
Surely the town council had to have given permission.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, I think that they have to. Kind of. I mean, I think that they kind of have to. What should, unless they grant that group permission and don't grant a church permission, then there's a legal problem there. That's discrimination. But I think our system demands that they have to. If the only objection is it wasn't a sound ordinance, which they could have been, like, that would be my first argument. You guys are making a bunch of racket 5 times a day on this day.
Everybody else does too.
Well, you're right. Well, so there we go, right? In my neighborhood, there's a lot of racket every weekend, in the county, but sounds like freedom. Yeah. Yeah.
In Texas, they were planning to build a home
Yes.
on Unity.
Yep. And
the governor stopped it, they said.
Well, he's doing everything he can to stop it. The big thing that I heard is they were running an unlicensed mortuary, which is a big problem. Yeah, and so there's some means that he can go about to fix that. But yeah, Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's all sorts of things, right? So you have Islamic financing
Well, they want to do Sharia law.
that you don't qualify for. There's a religious test for that.
They're trying to set up a
Yeah.
government in that
Okay.
area.
That's
too.
Yeah.
well, and it's not just that area. That's what I'm getting at. Is that it's seditious. Yeah. Islam is fundamentally seditious because it's unable to be separated from political power. So I will say, unfortunately, that there are some Christian traditions that have that problem also in their understanding of the place of Israel in their eschatology. They tend that way. Because the first thing you'll hear when you object to Islam's government tendencies is, what about Roman Catholicism in history? And they kind of have a point. Roman Catholicism was not a good government, right? Dispensationalists have this advantage in that we're not trying to be the government, nor are we trying to bring in the kingdom, build the kingdom, structure the kingdom, make laws that are the kingdom. Dispensationalists don't do that because we realize that Jesus is going to do that, and we don't do what Jesus does, right? Now, if I were going to make an argument for why we should not allow America to be Islamicized, my argument is this, and I already gave it, which is that the one thing that's already keeping us from getting scraped off into two oceans is our support of Israel. That's the one thing. That is the linchpin, and that goes away, right? The church doesn't go away. Islamization doesn't scare the church. The church thrives. We could probably do with some good old persecution in the United States, quite frankly. Real persecution, because that would get rid of our stupid cancel culture a lot, probably. But that's the one thing. So it's not about whether we're the kingdom, or whether we ought to be running Jerusalem or any of the other historical things that were said were stupid for Christianity to do. Really, that's not our mandate. The mandate is that we support Israel. And if we love our country and want it to continue, then we make decisions that allow us to continue to be an ally of Israel, period. Because otherwise, we cease to exist as we know it. That's my opinion. All right. So, anyway, did we turn the live stream off, or that's almost as bad as me talking about communism for 40 minutes, doing that for 5 minutes. All right. We can go ahead and turn it off now. All right.